Of all the characters in Helluva Boss, no character has been quite as marketed as Stolas. Sure, Blitz may be the main character, but most of his character as of late revolves around Stolas. And I would say the same is true for Stolas with his relationship with Blitz, if it wasn't for another person in his life that has a heavy influence on his character. His daughter, Octavia. Ever since the second episode of Helluva Boss, the show has established that Stolas has a troubled relationship with his daughter, but despite that, he truly does love her and is trying his best to be a father she can admire and enjoy being around. At least that is what the show wants the audience to believe, but if you take a closer look at the way Stolas treats his relationship with Octavia, it becomes evident that Stolas isn't only a bad father, but a passively abusive one. But to recognize how such a well-meaning and loving person like Stolas could turn into a child abuser, we have to go back to the second episode of the show where Octavia was introduced. Back during Lululand, throughout the episode, Stolas tried to bond with Octavia, but when he did, he took advantage of the situation to not only spend time with her, but with Blitz as well. Now, this isn't inherently wrong, as Stolas is at least putting in the effort to spend time with Octavia, but then when he is trying to spend quality time with her, he only seems to have eyes on one person, and that's Blitz. The purpose of trying to bond and spend quality time with someone is for two people to be solely focused on one another for a specified period of time. It's supposed to just be about two people enjoying each other's company, and it isn't wrong for Stolas to invite Blitz to be his bodyguard given Stolas and Octavia's financial circumstances, but when it does become a problem is when Stolas jeopardizes the very purpose of this outing, which is to spend time with Octavia so that he can flirt with Blitz. By doing this, Stolas is essentially trivializing what should be a personal and intimate activity with his daughter into a distraction for her in an attempt to make her happy without Stolas actually putting any effort into making her happy. Thankfully, when Octavia notices this, she calls him out for it, and in a moment of vulnerability, she asks if Stolas would ever leave her behind for Blitz, and Stolas, understanding how her Octavia is, makes her a promise that he would never do that. And in this moment, Octavia trusted Stolas. This was the bonding experience that Stolas had wanted, and it's because of this chain of events that he confirmed to Octavia that he does care for her by listening and understanding what she has to say and what she feels. And to gain her trust, to create mutual understanding between the two, Stolas made her a promise that her worst fears would never become a reality. This promise, this declaration of trust, understanding, and love between father and daughter became a vow that represents the importance of their connection with one another and the understanding of the responsibility Stolas owes Octavia as a father, along with Octavia from this point onward unconditionally having faith in Stolas to be a person she can be unguarded around and trust that he will always have her best interest at heart. To break this promise would be the ultimate betrayal of the trust that is needed to form the foundation of the bond that these two have, and would desecrate the sacred intricacies that are essential in making a loving and healthy parental relationship. Unfortunately, as we fast forward to Mastermind, Stolas breaks this promise to such an extreme degree that it's comparable to Stolas announcing that he is disowning his daughter. During Mastermind, Stolas saves Blitz's life by taking the blame for everything Blitz was being accused of, but he did it with the complete expectation that he would be executed for his crimes. This is the action that broke his promise to Octavia and jeopardized their relationship so badly that I don't realistically see any way for Stolas to earn his daughter's trust ever again. Stolas was willing to sacrifice his life, responsibilities, and relationship with his daughter in the most permanent way possible to save Blitz. Through his actions, he declared on public TV being broadcast throughout all of hell that he had the choice between continuing to live as a father to Octavia and dying to save Blitz, and he chose Blitz. If Stolas had died for his crimes like he expected, he would have word for word did the exact thing that he promised he would never do to Octavia.
Are you gonna run off with him? And leave me behind? Go away where I can't find you?
And it's because of his failure to keep his promise to his daughter that he rightfully lost her trust and she disowns him, but strangely enough, many fans perceive Stolas as the victim here instead of Octavia, which is actually fairly understandable, as just like how Stolas emotionally manipulated Octavia, this show emotionally manipulates its audience into believing that he's the victim, even though the only person that can be reasonably blamed for Stolas being miserable is Stolas himself. You see, this show wants us to feel bad for Stolas by portraying him in an abusive marriage and as a person who has nothing good going for him other than his relationship with Octavia and Blitz. The problem here is that outside of his marriage with Stella, all his misery is self-inflicted because he has a codependent personality. It's one thing to want to be in love and have friends, but for Stolas, a person who only has to work 1 day per month and has more money than he knows what to do with, it comes off as completely pathetic that the only things that makes him happy are his interactions with Octavia and Blitz. The two most important things a person needs to turn their life around is time and money, and Stolas has an excess of both those things. He has all of the resources he needs to do whatever he wants, but whenever we see him alone, he spends his time feeling sorry for himself and watching TV. If you compare him with the sins of Helva Boss, who find themselves in similar circumstances of having time and money, you will notice that each one uses those resources to create something that is fulfilling. Mammon performs at concerts and creates contests. Asmodeus has a club and creates sex toys. Beelzebub hosts parties. And even someone like Belphegor has a pharmaceutical company. The point I'm making is that Stolas has almost complete control of his life, with the only thing that has been forced onto him is his marriage to Stella, but that was only for the purpose of creating an heir, and he already did that. That's why he can divorce Stella with no repercussions outside of her being a nuisance in his life, and he now has nearly limitless options to fill his life with that could give him a sense of purpose and fulfillment, but he never even tries to do that because he's too depressed about a single imp not being in love with him. So that brings up the question of why should I feel sympathy for a person who doesn't even try to improve their life despite having all the resources to do so? And more importantly, why would anyone think that under these circumstances it's justifiable to try to give up your life for someone who doesn't love you while you know that there is someone out there relying on you to be her father? And that's why no matter how much this show frames him as a victim, all you have to do is pay attention to the things he does against the things he says in association with his role as a father figure, and it is clear that he is so blinded by self-pity and his obsession with Blitz that he becomes neglectful of Octavia whenever she is around and only pays attention to her when she isn't. Now, while on the surface level Stolas may not come across as an abusive parent because he isn't deliberately malicious, he commits a considerable number of actions that are emotionally abusive and neglectful, intentional or not. When people think of abuse, the first associations that come to mind are physical and sexual, but in reality the most common form of abuse is emotional. However, when thinking of emotional abuse, many people only think of verbal abuse, but the more subtle form of emotional abuse that many people don't recognize takes the forms of emotional deprivation and emotional neglect. Emotional deprivation is when a parent makes their child feel unloved or unwanted, and emotional neglect is when a parent fails at providing a child's emotional needs. These two forms of abuse go together so often that one usually causes the other, and because of that, the terms are often used interchangeably, or emotional deprivation is just characterized as a part of emotional neglect. What makes neglect so sinister is that most children and other adults can't even recognize when this form of abuse is taking place because there is no physical evidence of this form of abuse to use as evidence against the parent committing them, as it is completely psychological, and a parent can easily cover up emotional neglect inflicted on their child by simply telling them the lie that they have done nothing wrong. And this is exactly what Stolas does in Sinsmas. Once Octavia recognizes what Stolas has been doing to her and confronts him, instead of owning up to his mistake and the fact that he broke such an important promise to her, he tries to emotionally manipulate her by using the same tactics he used back in Lululand to try to make her empathize for him by telling her that she is the most important thing in his life. Even in this moment of Stolas begging for Octavia to forgive him, his victim mentality shines through, insisting that it wasn't his choice, denying any responsibility for his actions, and tries to undermine how Octavia feels by telling her that she doesn't understand. After failing at all of these manipulation tactics, in a final desperate plea, he tells her that he loves her in an attempt to emotionally sway her to see things from his point of view. It's very telling that throughout this entire exchange, Stolas is in a constant state of denial and uses every form of emotional manipulation he knows on Octavia to try to change her mind instead of trying to understand her. Not once does he even say he's sorry, because in doing so that would be admitting that he is wrong. Unlike his apology in Lululand, where he listens and tries to understand her, Stolas is more concerned with protecting his image as a victim so he doesn't have to face accountability, rather than actually listening to what Octavia has to say. Between him committing an action that he knew would result in him abandoning Octavia, and the way he acted towards her in Sincemas, it's not a far cry to categorize Stolas as a lying, manipulative, inconsiderate, and irresponsible sorry excuse of a father with a self-pitying victim complex. But be that as it may, as I mentioned earlier, he isn't doing any of this maliciously, and abuse typically is categorized as an intentional action, but because the abuse Stolas commits is passive and unintentional, that lands him in the category of being a negligent parent rather than an abusive parent. But with that being said, negligence, while often considered to be less severe, is still considered to be a form of abuse nevertheless. Meaning that you wouldn't be wrong to classify Stolas as an abusive parent. I don't doubt that Stolas loves Octavia, but with the way he has treated her, it is evident that he simply isn't emotionally responsible enough to be a father figure to her. Between breaking promises to her, publicly showing all of hell that he prioritizes being in a relationship with Blitz more than being her father, refusing to take accountability for his shortcomings, always seeing himself as a victim, being completely dependent on his relationships with others, and unintentionally emotionally neglecting, manipulating, and abusing Octavia, it's clear that Stolas' negligence and lack of maturity proves that he isn't worthy of being a parent and has a long way to go before he can be considered a positive influence on Octavia's life.
Oh, here's an idea. You could shut the fuck up.